Now it's on. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Valerie Steele. This is the Fashion Culture Program for the museum at FIT. And I'm delighted that tonight I'll be in conversation with Nicole Miller. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, why don't we get the first slide up? Oh, I guess I have to move that forward. All right. So I wanted to start way back when you were a child, and I wondered if you could start by telling us about your early life and how your family influenced you.
Okay, well, so one important thing in my past was my mother was from Paris, and she, as you can see, she was a very, very chic lady back in the day, and so as a child, she always would order magazines from Paris, from France. So I always had French fashion magazines. Of course, they came by boat, and they took about 2 months to arrive, but I would just live for getting those French fashion magazines, particularly Marie Claire. That, I think, was my favorite one. Anyway, so my whole life, I just dreamed about Paris and going to Paris and fashion and everything. It was just like the biggest thing to me. And of course, I was in this small town in Massachusetts, and everybody was very, very conservative. But anyway, I was just obsessed with fashion from a very early age, and my mother was a great influence. And I also had her old clothes. She had a lot of her clothes from Paris, too, which were beautifully made.
So did you ever wear those?
I did. Actually, I wore a lot of them in high school. And my mother was in Paris during the war, in World War II, and she's a very brave, brave woman, because the food in Paris was terrible. There was no food, and it was occupied by the Germans. And she would go out to the country, and she would smuggle food through the German lines. Right. And so she was the best-dressed person in Paris, because she would bring food back for the shoemaker and the tailor. And to thank her, they would make her clothes. So she was very well dressed.
That's fascinating. So from the beginning, my next question was, how did you know when did you get interested in fashion? But clearly it was pretty much from birth.
Well, I mean, like I said, I was always obsessed with the French fashion magazines, and through high school, I learned how to make my own clothes when I couldn't get to New York. But one thing, when I could get to New York, I would always go to paraphernalia, and I wish I had saved those clothes, but you guys probably have never heard of the paraphernalia stores, but in the 60s, they were the coolest stores around. And I think Betsy Johnson used to design for them, too.
Yes, she did.
So if ever I got a chance to go to New York, I would immediately go shopping and get things there. And if I couldn't get to New York, I would make my own clothes. And early on, I would buy patterns, and I would alter them, and I would turn them into my design, because I couldn't really make my own patterns yet. I didn't know how. So I was sort of like cutting and pasting and altering things to be my own idea. And I wish I had, my parents didn't take a lot of pictures of me in high school. I don't know why. I don't think they liked my clothes. But I remember I had this great 1960s suit up in the right-hand corner, top right, and it had a huge patent leather belt with a big buckle on it, and it was like, kind of Edwardian and had like 3 gold buttons. And that was a very cool kind of Nehru-looking coat on the left. And then I always got my hair cut at Sassoon. I loved Fidel Sassoon. So that's why I have that funny little haircut there. Don't think I'll do that again.
But it was a very, very cool look for the time. That was just amazing.
And so continuing on my quest for fashion, actually, when I was in high school, I always thought everybody had told me I was going to be tall because I was kind of skinny and lanky. So I thought, well, I'm just going to be a model. First that was before I was going to be a designer, I was going to be a model. And so I was like measuring myself every day. It was like, and then it got to like 5'4", and it just kind of got stuck at 5'4", and I got, well, I got to rethink this. Plan B. Anyway, so then I decided to go to Rhode Island School of Design, and this is like my freshman year at RISD, and that was my roommate over there on the right, and she was always getting me to make her bell-bottom pants. She always wanted these bell-bottom pants, and I'm sure I made that pair she's wearing, and then she would get them really worn out. Anyway, and there I am on the front lawn of RISD, and it still kind of looks the same way because I go back there now and then. Anyway, so then after freshman year of RISD, which was just foundation, it was just art, I decided to rig up my own exchange program, and I went to Paris because my mother was still saying, you've got to go to Paris. So I rigged up my own exchange program for sophomore year, and I went to the Haute Couture School in Paris. And I think that's your next slide.
So yes, and I wanted to ask too, what the differences were in the what you learned at RISD as opposed to the École de la Chambre Syndicale.
Oh, very dramatically different. So when I went to RISD, it was, really hippie art school and very free-spirited. And actually, the fashion department, which is very in there now, was the very out department because everybody was, more esoteric, and they were a painter or a sculptor, and they were doing something just, more creative than they weren't doing something that was commercial, and the apparel department was considered commercial. Anyway, so after the freshman year of just art and foundation, I decided to go to Paris for a year and see if I really wanted to stay in fashion because, RISD was sort of playing games in my head. So I went to Paris and I went to this haute couture school, which was very old-fashioned, and they wouldn't let you use a pencil on your muslin or any marker, anything. Everything had to be done by threads. And you had to make this full muslin pattern, and there couldn't be any marks on it, and you had to present it to the teacher. And it was very, very old-fashioned. But anyway, I really, really learned a lot from that.
Yes.
Because every muslin had to be beautiful, had to be a work of art, and your thread lines couldn't be crooked. You even had to do grain lines by hand. So it was very intense, and you had to press everything and present it. And also, we had like art history and fashion history, and we got to go to all the couture shows, which was great.
How fabulous.
So there was a lot of benefits to that, and it was a great year in Paris. And after that, I decided I wanted to go, I would just go back to RISD. And so I got full credit, and I managed to just go right back in for junior year.
And we've got another picture here of a system in Paris, I guess. That looks pretty
Oh,
amazing.
I think this is a little later.
A little later, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so I went back to RISD, and RISD was a little bit more, it was a little more about drawing and portfolios. I mean, we did do a lot of drawing in Paris, but there was more focus on portfolios. And we made, instead of just making the pattern, we were making the full projects. So, and then we had our big fashion show every year. And then we were doing full collections. But RISD really had a lot of freedom, and it was just very art-oriented and creative, and you could do whatever you want. So I think the combination of the two educations was really great, to have both the art
Yes.
and the technical background of the French school.
Yes.
So it was great for me because when I actually had to make my clothes, I was very, I got to be really good at pattern making.
Well, and of course, the whole system of fashion was so different in Paris than it was in the United States, and is as well.
Yeah, there was a lot more technique and handwork and that sort of thing. And, well, back then, New York, the United States is really far more advanced now, and everybody's doing far more creative things. And you can, because you can get things made like in China and India and all that. But before, people just made things in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And there were just, a lot of factories that were just not that great, and you couldn't get a lot of interesting things made,
Yeah.
where now you can get anything you want made here. So American fashion was more about really ready to wear, make
Yes.
it fast, and there wasn't, there were some designers that were very expensive, obviously,
Yeah.
like an Oscar de la Renta or somebody, but most of the United States was just very ready to wear oriented.
And there wasn't that much ready to wear in Paris.
No, not so much, but when I was there, that was the beginning of the contemporary market, and that's when Kenzo hit the scene, and Claude Montana, and Terry Mugler, and Chantal Thomas. So it was a very, very exciting time in
Yes.
Paris, and they were like the new young designers, and they were renegades, and they all did like really cool stuff. And they were not as expensive as couture,
Right.
but they were ready to wear, but they were kind of expensive ready to wear.
Yes, yes.
I still have a lot of those clothes.
Oh, yes, I'm glad you didn't get rid of those. So what would you say?
And I just,
Oh, yeah,
that-
sorry,
there
sorry,
was
go
that
back.
one quick slide about Paris,
Yes.
but this is just, they're just invitations because I always wanted to show in Paris, and we didn't do a runway show, but we did trade shows in
Yes.
Paris. And these are some of the posters from trade shows we did in Paris.
Oh, how fabulous.
So we did sell over there.
And then, since there are probably a lot of students in the audience, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you feel you learned in the two schools.
Well, I really feel like I could just do every step of the way, and I feel like, well, you know, it's really interesting because I went to, about 2 years ago, I was here to the FIT presentation, I guess when all the seniors showed their work, and I was very, very impressed because everything was just so elaborately made and complicated, and I just remember when I was at RISD, things were much more simplistic. I mean, we did do things like, you know, corsets and things like that, but I thought the creativity here was just amazing. It was very, very impressive. But, so I think, you know, everybody is doing like much more than they used to
Yeah.
in schools. And hopefully they're doing it themselves. Anyway, so I think like I really learned more about technique and couture and handiwork in Paris, and then RISD was more do-it-yourself. And but like I said, there was a lot of freedom there, and we had a lot of you know, freedom to experiment and do what we wanted. But I feel that I can always do every step of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, I can drape the dress. I mean, I've done tailoring. I've done all that.
Well, it's interesting because FIT has the reputation for being really excellent technically, that the students really, really learn how to do things. And the ideal, I guess, is always to combine the technique with some kind of an artistic or free-spirited system.
Right.
What about business? Did either school tell you anything about the business of fashion?
Absolutely nothing. And, but I've noticed, because I know the schools are really talking more about business, because I think it's a really important thing for everybody. And I know a lot of designers have gone on into their own businesses, and that's always like the biggest problem is like cash flow and understanding, you know, quantities and that sort of thing. Because it's a very challenging business. You know, it's just, and it's always easy to be the new kid on the block, and everything is easy and easy. And then, you know, 5 years down the road, you're sitting with like inventory or whatever. But the problems keep up and they escalate the longer you're in business.
Yeah.
And some of these pictures are just me working, you know, behind the runway show. And, you know, I always like to say I'm very hands-on and very involved with every step of the process.
You also, let's see, if this is the right one? I'm trying to think that when you interned with Clovis Ruffin? This is not that one, right?
No, you know, I thought there was one picture of him somewhere.
Yeah, there was one somewhere. But this one is still in school.
No, these are not in school. These are usually backstage or various runway shows I've had. But the one on the bottom picture is interesting because I went to Rwanda and I had a very interesting trip on working with some of the women's sort of cottage industry factories there. And it was interesting. These women are so eager to learn, and they have foot-powered sewing machines, everything. They have like very little electricity in Rwanda. So I did a lot of seminars, and I worked with them, and I showed them some sewing tips and everything, and I spent a week there. But it was a very rewarding week because they really do need help, and they need help, and they need business, and they need a lot of advice.
So how do you think that will work on a larger scale? Because if you're going to be trying to, you know, train women or workers in general in the global South, how do they get integrated into this global fashion system?
Well, most of them are affiliated with various agents. This particular ones that I went to were represented by a company called Inigo Africa.
Yes.
Do you know that company?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. So, and they have connected them to a lot of different companies. And when we had a lot of retail stores, we did do a lot of business, and we did buy a lot of things from them. But what they want is ongoing business.
Yeah.
And there was a very large company, and I don't want to mention the name, but had given them like a huge order one year, and they just wanted an order every year.
Right.
And they were looking forward to the next year, and then they never came back.
Yeah.
So they want consistency.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's what's important.
that's one of the things I was impressed that Dries van Noten has been working year after year, decade after decade with a group of embroiderers in Gujarat, because that seems different than a lot of companies that kind of fly in for an out.
Right.
Now this is Clovis Ruffin. You interned with Clovis Ruffin?
Yes.
How cool. What was that like?
Yeah. You know,
You probably need to explain who he is to some members
well,
of
it
the
makes
audience.
me very sad because he's not really remembered, and he was really the most famous designer in New York at the time. And it was about 1972 or 73, and this was a crazy story. I got an internship in New York with a guy that had gone to RISD, and I got there January 15th. I was supposed to be there for 6 weeks for winter session, and by February 1st, the company had gone out of business. And so we came in on Monday morning, and the whole showroom was stripped, and so my internship was over, but the parent company who had closed them said, "Oh, we'll send you over to Clovis Ruffin." And so I was like, great. So they sent me down to Clovis Ruffin's studio, and it was a very cool space and time because they always had the music blaring, and it was cool people, and all those famous models at the time were always coming by. Like there was like Billy Blair and Pat Cleveland.
Yes.
And Elva Chen, and they were always coming by his studio, and there was just always cool people, and they were all going out, always clubbing at these crazy Latin clubs every night,
Yes.
and everybody was always partying, and the music was blaring, and so it was a really fun 4 weeks. But actually, he did hire me when I came back to New York. He gave me a job, so that was my first job in New York too. So I was not only just an intern there. And he used to have these huge fashion shows, and he had all the top models, and it was just so exciting. And then, I don't know, just after a while, I guess the business just fizzled out. It just, it made me sad because he really was the top designer in New York in the contemporary market at the time. So you remember him, right?
Of course I remember him. I mean, that was a period when you had so many creative independents. I guess a lot of them were just undercapitalized.
Right. Well, he was backed by the same people that backed Ralph Lauren
Right.
at the time. So, but I don't know. But I don't know what happened. I really don't. But it just.
Yeah, such a shame. He's really
such a shame.
interesting. We have some of his work, but I'd like to
I
get
sent
more
you a
for the
couple.
collection.
I
That's
sent
right,
a
you did,
couple.
exactly.
Yeah, I collected a bunch of those. So anyway, so that was a great period in time, and his clothes were amazing.
And then you went and got a job as the head designer of a dressmaking company, P.J. Walsh.
Yes.
So can you tell us about working with Bud Conheim and how that evolved?
Well, I answered an ad in Women's Wear Daily. And actually, it was a great ad. It said, "Designer willing to travel to Europe." And I go, "Oh, that works for me. I'll take that job. I'll take that job." So anyway, I showed up, and it was a tiny little company that just started. And there was a person named P.J. Walsh, but she had quit to go live with her boyfriend, so she left. And so it was just me and a sewer, and I was like designer, pattern maker, cutter, and that was it. And we had like a salesperson and a receptionist and a production pattern maker. Anyway, so I made all my own patterns for about a year or two. But as I said, things weren't that complicated in the United States, so it was not super challenging. But anyway, so that business was really quite a roller coaster. But the very first, oh no, I'm confusing businesses. I'll tell that story later.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, anyway, it was really fun. But Bud had a great sense of humor. He was a really fun person to work with. But we were always getting in trouble because they always bought too much fabric. So if we needed 1,000 yards, he would buy 3,000 yards.
Oh.
So I got to be the master fabric manipulator because, we'd have this extra print that, of course, nobody wanted to see again, so I would figure out how to pleat it or smock it or whatever. And I really came up with some great selling dresses by just having to be creative. And there used to be this company, and I haven't seen this technique around much at all. They did elastic embroidery, and it was this company like in Brooklyn, and they had all these crazy patterns, and there'd be elastic in the bobbin. So it wasn't smocking, it would just be like a pattern. It could be flowers or different things. And I don't see that technique around much anymore, and I'm sure that company is long gone. Anyway, that was another way I got rid of excess inventory. So anyway, we had some really big hits, and but it was always like up and down, so it was a total roller coaster.
Yes.
But we had a lot of fun.
So then, how did you end up starting Nicole Miller?
Well, again, it's another story, because that company, PJ Walsh, we didn't own it. It was owned by a parent company, and the parent company had like 8 different divisions, and they were in Chapter 11. They were having financial problems. So Bud and I, we just left, and we took our employees, actually, and we scraped together $100,000, and, well, he had 100, I had 15. And we opened the business on $115,000. And so the story I was about to say about PJ Walsh actually happened in this business because, we really didn't have much money. So $115,000, even back then, did not go that far because we had to pay rent, we had to pay salaries, the whole thing. But literally the first month we were in business, I made this dress, which I think we have a picture of somewhere. Oh, there it is, the blue dress on that little stand.
Yes.
I wish you could see it better.
Oh,
but
yes.
It's a blouson with a hip smock. So I made this dress, and I refused to put hanger straps in it because people used to put hanger straps to make the dress blouson in the hanger, and I was like, no, it's just... And really, the dress looked very avant-garde for the time. I mean, now it looks dumb, but it looked very avant-garde that year. Anyway, we just shipped that dress to the department stores, and it flew out everywhere. I mean, it just flew out. We had to just keep buying more and more fabric. And
How
we were
wonderful.
selling, and back in the day, if something sold, they would reorder more right away. Now, they wait till the next season.
Right.
Oh, it sold well? Oh, get more next season, whatever. Meanwhile, so all the stores were calling us for more and more of these dresses, and we were just selling thousands of them, and, we couldn't get enough fabric to
What about workers? Were you hiring more workers to keep up with all these extra
No,
orders?
because it was factories.
Yep.
So we didn't own any factories, so we would just send it to the factories.
Yep.
So they were happy to have all this business. So one of my signatures was tiny little buttons, and it has kind of a Chinese collar with the 5 little buttons on the side, and then it has the smock tip. Anyway, it sold like crazy, and then everybody in the United States copied it, like everybody.
Yeah.
And it was like under every label. And finally I just said, I got to stop making this dress. So we
Wow.
moved on.
No, and you started the business in '82, which, I mean, what was the situation like in New York then, the fashion competition, the whole scene?
Well, I didn't start out doing fashion shows because we didn't have the money. I think we were in business 8 years before I had fashion shows.
Yeah.
But, so we were mainly just trying to stay afloat and sell clothes that would sell, and make nice clothes. And we were kind of in the beginning of the contemporary market very early on, and contemporary was still kind of a new thing because, well, now I guess they say bridge, but I think they used to say Missy.
They said, yeah.
Anyway, so we were the contemporary market, and it was a huge thing. So that went on for quite a while, and then, I guess in about 86 or 7, oddly enough, it all goes back to RISD. One of my former classmates called me and he said, oh, I think you should open up a retail store.
Yes.
And it was really funny because there was some 10,000 square foot store on 57th Street for $5 million a year. And he goes, what about this? And I go, I think it's a little rich for my blood here. So he said, so he had this little tiny store on Madison Avenue, which was 1,000 square feet. It was at between 66th and 67th Street. And I went and looked at it, and I said, oh, this is it. We've got to take this. So we opened the store. I think it was the end of '86. And, I've always liked whimsical prints. I don't really have any here on the mannequins. But we always used to do these fun prints and dresses, and, I would have, like, fingernails on them, or, I don't know, just always some little gag, matches, whatever. And so when we opened up the store, Bud said, oh, why don't you make me a few ties? And I was just going to make them for him to wear or whatever. But the factory ends up sending us like 4 dozen or whatever. So we put them in the store, and they took off. And the first thing we did was this Met theater ticket. We never asked anybody for rights.
Oh.
We just borrowed everything, every logo. So anyway, then the Met saw them, and they came and bought them.
Oh, instead of suing you, they bought them. That's great.
Well, the funny thing is they'd carried them in the store for about 3 years, and then we got a letter from a Met lawyer saying to cease and desist. And he said, you've been buying these ties from us for
That's so
3
crazy.
years already. But anyway, that set in motion this whole men's tie business. And, we just sort of started borrowing logos like crazy. We made a candy print tie with M&Ms and Nestle's. And they all said, oh, thank you, but next time don't put us in with our competition. So, but then we started getting a little nervous about it, so we started calling up and asking for permission. And most people would give us permission, and nobody asked for a royalty. And it exploded. And we ended up working with everybody, Marvel Comics, everything from Coca-Cola, Barbie, just about like every brand. We did like Pink Panther. We did, movies. We did every alcohol, every beer, everything. And we just had a huge business. And it was mostly men's ties, but we did women's scarves too. And then I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, men got conservative, and it turned into be casual Fridays, and nobody's wearing ties. And,
Right.
The tie business, it was great for about 5 years, and it just kind of fizzled out. But it was really fun when it lasted.
That sounds very cool.
And we made camp shirts and boxer shorts and all kinds of crazy things, and people are asking for them again.
Well, putting that in a larger context, how did your aesthetic evolve over the years? Because seems like it was almost accidental and suddenly became a huge hit. How did you then evolve your aesthetic?
Well, I feel like my aesthetic is always about the line, or the line and the cut and the drape of the dress. But there are some things that are really, basic to my personality. Like I've always had like a sense of humor about
Yes.
things, and I've always had a sense of whimsy, and I like things that are fun. And the company has always been like a fun company and a fun place to work. And like, for example, the second dress over is a spoof on a Fair Isle sweater.
Yes.
The first dress is a spoof on a biker dress, and that's a spoof on a Fair Isle sweater. And then the third dress, I was saying how I got really into fabric manipulation and pleating and smocking and all that. And if you see that dress closer, there's this pleat that we do. It's like title pleat, and the pleats interlock, and it just is so flattering on everybody's figure. But we just sold a ton of dresses with this title pleat. And we've done them in, silk fabrics, and we've done them in metal fabrics and everything. So it was quite, a big signature of mine for a long time, was that pleating detail. And then, the crochet and the beading, and
Yes.
of course, and then I always liked the good girl, bad girl thing, so I've always got the little bit of the badass thing
Yes.
going. So that's the safety pins and the leather. And leather was always a great category for us. We always do a lot of leather things.
Yeah.
And this dress I always thought was great, which we handmade in the office. It took weeks. It's macrame. I kind of call it the abacus dress, too.
Yes.
It looks like an abacus made of macrame. Anyway. And Carla Bruni wore this. Carla
Oh,
Bruni
how
wore
fab.
it in the show. Yeah.
So, how would you describe the fashion system in New York, which you obviously succeeded in turning to your own advantage. But how is the system at large, and how has that evolved?
Well, that has really changed.
That's changed hugely.
Because I have to say, when I started designing, designers were just designers. I mean, there was a few maybe that weren't, but mostly designers were designers. And like now, to enter this market, you're dealing with like influencers and stylists and socialites and actresses and singers. Everybody's got a clothing brand. So I don't know, like somebody said, like the best thing to do, somebody was saying to me, the best thing to do if you want to be a designer is to be a stylist first or a magazine editor. But I don't know, maybe you need to be able to sing too. But I think there's a lot of competition now, and there's a lot of challenges. When I started having fashion shows, so finally, so we did, the ties were all like in the 80s, and then we started having fashion shows in spring 91, so it was 1990. But the first year at a fashion show, there was only 40 shows. 40 shows. There was like one show per hour. Nobody overlapped. You had your time slot, and there was no two shows that day. No two shows at your time. And now if you read the fashion calendar, there's like 10 shows every hour, or like 5 or whatever. Yeah. It's very crowded.
Where were you having your shows?
I've had them all over, but the very first shows I had were at this club called Laura Bell's, and I'm not exactly sure. It might have been like 45th Street, like east-west, 45th, kind of towards 5th Avenue, I think between 6th and 5th, but I don't know what that club is now. Yeah. And we've had several at the public library, and then we had one at the Roxy once, and the old Roxy, the roller skating rink, and then we've had, many in the tents.
Yes.
So, we've been all over the place.
Your store, you mentioned your store before. How important do you think it is for designers to have their own retail space?
Well, I think it's really nice to have a retail space, and at one point we had 30 stores, but I don't like being in malls, because malls have like extra common charges. You have to stay there till 9 o'clock at night. I had a store in West Palm Beach, and the girls used to lock the doors because, these kids would come out of the movies and they would just all shoplift and everything. And the laws at the mall were that you had to stay open till 9, 7 days a week, and that sort of thing. So I didn't like dealing with malls. So as the mall leases came up, I just got out of them, and I had only freestanding stores. And I got an offer for Madison Avenue, so I gave that up, and our rent in Soho went like through the roof. So everything was an individual story. So I don't miss my retail stores at all, because
Yes.
But I'm not saying I wouldn't do another one at some point. But if I do that again, I would do one. I just don't want to have. And oh my God, the worst thing is people steal your employees. I would have great store manager, and the next thing, Prada would steal her. These people go around and say who's like the the sharpest salesperson around or whatever, and then they go and steal them, offer them more money. Yeah. So we were always like finding a new store manager for this, and when you have, all over the country. Anyway, I just didn't want to do that anymore.
Now, how did your process change over the years in all kinds of terms? Design, business, production, retailing, communications.
Well, I felt like at the beginning, like I said, we only had factories in Pennsylvania. Everything was like American made, and we were always, nobody would make a bias dress for us. Nobody would do a hem on a bias dress. And since then, we've gotten all these like Chinese factories that have moved here, and they do a great job. Plus, you could make things in China, which we couldn't before, and make things in India. So production is much more global, which is great, because you can do so many things we couldn't do when I first started in business. So I'm really happy about that. And then, obviously, when we started out, like computers, nothing was like computers or email. Everything's gotten so much more technological than it used to be.
And how do you think that's affected design?
Well, so much design, I think, in a lot of companies is so formulaic. Yeah. You're just like charts and plotting things in and filling things in, and flats. I hate flats because they always look bad. They just never look like the real garment. And so, my sketches would always have life, and then somebody would put it into a flat, and I go, oh. Some people do some nice flats, though, but for the most part, I don't know. And I just feel everything flat never looks as good.
Some of these are not measuring to what I was given as the lineup, so I'm not sure where we are here.
Can we go back?
Yeah, let's go back one.
So I guess this is a little bit of
yes.
celebrity dressing, and there's some highlights of fashion shows too. And when the ties were big, Brad Pitt wore all my ties in that movie Seven. I don't know if anybody saw that. And then Angelina Jolie wore that dress when she and Brad Pitt came out on stage for the premiere. And that dress ended up being on the cover of every tabloid.
Yeah.
It was like all over the place. And that was another dress that I had to stop making because it was just, I didn't want to see that everywhere. And anyway, the middle picture is my first fashion show, and I got all the superstars. I had Christy, Linda, everybody, Naomi, Yasmin LeBon, Elaine Irwin, great bunch of girls. That was really fun. And Miley Cyrus we just dressed recently, and then Cardi B's up there in a dress from a couple collections ago. And there's Tyra Banks, who was always like fabulous on the runway.
Yes.
She was just so sassy and amazing. And
So yes, that's quite a lot of accomplishments. And of course, when you get all the stars, then everybody does pay attention. It's kind of extraordinary.
and I don't know what I'm fixing there on the bottom. Oh, that's me in Rwanda again, working in that.
And I've got more accomplishments here.
And, well, some of these dresses are here, but this was always one of my favorite shows, so I took a screen grab of, this was like a magazine of this, and there you see Carla Bruni on the right in that dress, and there's Naomi Campbell, and there's Yasmin LeBon, Helena Christensen, Cecilia Chancellor. Anyway, that was another great show with a great bunch of girls. And it's funny, usually if I do fashion shows now, they're usually one theme, but I used to do like 5 themes, and it would be like 5 little stories. And so we had the biker segment, and then there was a Miami segment. I think that green dress is from the Miami segment. But this had like 5 different little themes going on. It was really a really fun show.
That is
Except the tape got stuck. It was funny, Nadia Auerman walked out, and she was so pissed off because she was supposed to walk out to Purple Rain, and it got stuck on the song before. Oh, no. So you see her walking down the runway, she looks really mad.
Well, at least the music kept going at all. I remember Isabel Toledo telling me once that they ran out of batteries, and the sound suddenly slowed way down, and there was no real music for the rest of the show.
I know, we all have stories like that, broken heels and ripped dresses, and something always goes wrong, a little bit wrong.
Well, what do you think is the main purpose of a fashion show, really? Because I mean, it is so indelibly a part of our memories of fashion. How does it function, both at the time and later?
They really, really do create a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
And I have to say, because I was, I had been in business 7 or 8 years or whatever, and then I had my first fashion show, and everything just was magnified.
Yeah.
Everything just blew up. And, all of a sudden I was being asked to all kinds of events, and I was being, asked to do this and that. And I mean, just the opportunities that came my way just expanded greatly just after having a fashion show. And also, it's so good for morale.
Yes.
I mean, it's like the whole staff gets so excited about, the show. And meanwhile, people would say to me, "Don't you get excited?" And I go, "No, I don't get excited till it's over." It's just, but I was just like, no, I'm not excited. I'm like a wreck. I'm just like nervous about like, what's going to go wrong this time, or is somebody going to hate it, or is somebody going to say something bad about it, or, So there's always so many variables. You just end up being like worried. And then you can relax after.
And in general, how do you think your fashion shows have evolved over time? Have you seen changes?
Well, I have to say, I do like all my earlier shows in a way better because I felt like we were just more whimsical and fun, even though I've had a lot of fun in my later shows too. And there always is some thread of whimsy in the
Yes.
theme. I mean, we did
Yes.
kind of a let them eat cake show once called the Revolution, and we did, a Copacabana Rio show. So we've done like some fun things, and we had like a, break dancer open the show, and so we always try to do something that's a little bit fun, but some of the things that were just not realistic that we used to do, and that were, the very first show we did this dress with a big Sweet and Low packet on it. Which I don't know if you remember that, but it's kind of memorable. And I didn't have one. I finally got one the other day.
Yes.
Vintage store in Brooklyn. So anyway, I'm always trying to recollect my archives.
That's
because
right.
there's so many things I don't know, just went by the wayside.
Are you setting up a place to take care of it? Where do you keep
Yeah,
your archive?
I have a big archives
Yep.
closet in the office. Yeah.
How fabulous. Well, I know we've started to get some questions from the audience.
Okay.
And what did I predict? There's a question. Do you have any advice for fashion students starting off today?
Well, I think one of my bits of advice there was the magazine editor and stylist route.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that you stay focused, and I think you have to have some idea and have a strong sense of self. I used to see designers that, one year they'd have like this job and that job and whatever, and they kind of go, it's a job. But I think you have to really develop your own identity and stick with it. And you have to be your own advocate. And you've got to be a self-promoter. These days you really have to be a self-promoter. So you have to do all your social media stuff, and you have to do the best you can and really focus on your goals.
Yes, that whole kind of self-direction. I used to see that with students. Some students you could just see they'd worked out their plan of action, and they would just head towards it.
Yeah.
Another great question. What is your most cherished personal fashion item? In this archive you're developing, what's the thing that you love most?
Oh, of my own.
Of your
or
own,
my
yes.
own. Okay.
Or perhaps in general. I'm not sure from the question.
Well, it's funny because once you had asked me here to speak about a Claire McCardle thing.
Yes.
And I wore my Claire McCardle.
Yes.
And I still have that. So that's kind of my one treasured thing in my closet.
Yeah.
But I think all my clothes from the 90s I really like a lot. And I have, here I've split it up. There's some things there's one dress from 2000,
Yeah.
one from like the 2010s,
Yep.
and like two things from the 90s, I guess. So I tried to split it up here a little bit. But maybe this macrame dress. It's kind
The macrame dress is pretty fabulous.
yeah.
And Claire McCardle is fabulous, too. I remember showing a French curator and museum director our Claire McCardles at the museum, and he was just so blown away by them that they really didn't have any in France.
Yeah, well, I have quite a good one. It's a three-piece kind of
Yes.
piqué thing, so it was a really good piece.
Ah, wow. Okay, we've got a lot. All right. You did a number of food print dresses in the 1990s. What was the inspiration or story behind those prints?
Wow, we did a lot of funny ones. There was a fettuccine.
Uh-huh.
There was an arugula salad. But those were just like the food objects. There was a lot of, there was like tomatoes. There was all kinds of fruit. There was vegetables. But then we did a lot of things for like junk food. Like, we did potato chips and, like Lay's. We did a lot of things for corporations too. So, those were the corporate ones. But I don't know, we were just, everything was always like fun. And what crazy idea could we come up with tomorrow? And I had like, a great bunch of assistants, and we would just go, oh, let's do this, let's do that. And that's how it would come about.
Well, we're going to do a show next year on food and fashion. You should
Oh.
send us some pictures from your archive. We'll see if we can borrow something.
Yeah, sure.
What's your favorite decade of fashion?
Oh, the 60s.
60s.
Of
okay.
course, I just love that mod era, and I loved Twiggy and she was like the best.
Yes, yes. What's one thing you tell someone who wants to start their own business?
Well, take a business course, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think, one of the things that always gets people is like inventory and, getting stuck either with clothing or getting stuck with fabric. And so I told my stories of getting over excess fabric. But there's been times, like one time we had a big order for Saks Fifth Avenue, and it was a tulle skirt with a little tube top with like sequins on it. And the production person had never checked the sweater, so we shipped them to Saks, and all the sequins popped off.
Oh, no.
And so we got a 500-piece return. And we couldn't even sell them to anybody else. I mean, you couldn't even close it out to Lomans because they were just damaged. And production is really important, and fit is really important. Your clothes have to fit. It's funny, I was in Paris once, and I tried on these Balenciaga pants, and they'd done the stretch the wrong way.
Oh, God.
The stretch was like in the length, not across.
Oh, God.
So
That's tragic.
they do things, they make mistakes too.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Paris, because here's someone who's BA programmers in Paris who's writing, what advice do you have for a student studying in Paris beginning to break into the fashion industry? Presumably over there, wants to break into Paris fashion industry.
Well, I'm not sure because it's changed, but when I went to school in Paris, a lot of my classmates got these jobs in the couture houses and various houses around, and they would get paid like $40 a week. Literally, I remember it was like 200 francs a week for like a 60-hour work week, and they'd work them to the dogs. I don't think they have the labor laws we had here. But things have changed. I'm sure it's a lot easier. And I have a former intern of mine is in Paris now, and I think she got a job because she interned first. And so when she went back, she did get a job with the company she interned. So it's maybe a good idea to look for internship possibilities in Europe if you're looking for a job.
Now here's someone who's asking about the release of your fun print collections, like the Barbie one. And she says, P.S., I'm wearing the Barbie kimono now. So do you remember when you did the Barbie prints?
I don't remember exactly. I would estimate it was about 1992 or 3. It would be around about that time. And we also did 2 Barbie dolls.
Yes. Here's someone who says, love your jacket. Is this something you would consider doing again?
Oh, this jacket?
Yeah, that jacket.
Well, we've always done a lot of embellished leather jackets, and the most popular one has been the Evil Eye, and I think the Evil Eye one is still available. This crown one is sold out because I have the last one.
Here's someone asking, do you have any advice for adapting to the industry's constant changes?
Well, I got a crazy request the other day about, the California Proposition 65, where, like, they think every chemical in the world causes cancer, so you have to, like, get all these documents for certain states that are really, like, strict about this. So, life has gotten a lot more complicated than it used to be. So there's a lot of these issues that turn up all the time, that people are just much more particular. And now with all the eco thing, and I'm very big on recycling, and we've done a lot of reuse of vintage clothes for some of our collections whenever we can. But I don't know. I'm just not a big believer in polyester being like so eco-friendly, which a lot of people are trying to tell us it is, because it's still going into the water system. So I'm kind of against that. But I know there's like this Fashion Act is coming up, and then there's the Higgs Index, which Scandinavia has gone against the Higgs Index, and they are not allowing people to tag that as a standard anymore. So, and a lot of things are like greenwashing. It's a very complicated world, and we try to do what we can and try to be as eco-friendly as we can, but it's not an easy thing to navigate these days.
It's not.
And you have to really just stay educated about it.
One person's asking, this is an interesting question. I think a lot of people are interested in this. On average, what do you think, how many dresses or looks from a show actually get produced for sale?
Well, it varies from year to year, but I would say we would probably mostly make about 60%,
Right.
a good 60%. And I've had shows that maybe it's been less, and I've had shows that it's been more. So, but I'd say 60s.
Yeah.
Because there's always a few things, like, I mean, everything else here was produced, but this was not.
Right.
I mean, we
So
probably
much work,
could
yeah.
now make it in India or whatever, but this never got made, but the other ones got made.
This is a young audience. Someone's asking, what age were you when you made your first serious career steps in the fashion world?
Well, I mean, I feel like I got out of college, and when I came to New York, and well, I guess my first job with Clovis Rep.
That's right. And this is the last question here. Who is your favorite celebrity to work with?
Well, it's interesting, but lots of times when I dress a celebrity, I don't get to meet them because they get dressed in LA.
Right.
And we send the clothes to LA and that sort of thing. But I did meet Angelina Jolie after she wore the dress, not before.
Yeah.
And she was always like very charming and very nice. But I worked with Felicity Huffman. She's really nice, and Angelica Houston, and Beyonce. We've dressed a lot.
Yes.
But I haven't really done a fitting with her. I've met her, but I haven't really done a fitting with her. I don't know. I mean, very often we just would send it to our celebrity dressing company in LA, and boom, 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 they send it to the stylist or whatever, and you keep your fingers crossed.
Yes,
They're
yes,
gonna wear
exactly.
it. And so, we had dressed like Joss Stone quite a bit, and Cyndi Lauper quite a
Yes.
bit, and Sheryl Crow. So I've dressed a lot of musicians too.
Yes, that's right. Is there anything important we haven't talked about that you'd like to add now?
Oh, but I'm very happy to be showcasing this, and because it's our 40th anniversary year,
Yes.
so it's perfect. So, and I've been, going through all the old books and seeing things all over again, and I've gone through all kinds of old press pictures and stuff. So, it's been kind of nice to revisit all those things. And I feel like as a company, we've always stayed young.
Yeah.
I've seen companies, the longer they're in business, and the clothes get dumber and dumber and dumber, and I felt like we've always kept that kind of integrity and, tried to stay young and modern and, keep on that track.
Yes, yes. Well, as you said, the fun aspect of it. What's the point if it's not fun?
Yeah, exactly.
Would you join me in thanking Nicole?